Hey yo, what's good everyone? Twisty here with Opener Sorcery, and today I want to go ahead and talk about boredom and rest. Now, with rest, you can go ahead and understand or get a general idea of the benefits of that just through experience itself, but boredom tends to get a bad rap, and honestly, I want to take that negative stigma it has and kind of flip it on its head, or at least that has been where my own manner of personal reflection and meditation has been as of late. So, that having been said, this is kind of like a similar sort of approach to a previous subject that I went ahead and talked about, being laziness the goal of life, which for those who are listening on the YouTube posting of this, I can go ahead and put a link in the description for. Now, that having been said, the source of this manner of contemplation comes from me recently drawing the Four of Cups for a reading I was doing for myself in regards to the tarot. And for those who don't know what the tarot is, which if you're listening to me speaking, this is likely your realm of things with spirituality overall, but just in case, I'll put a link to a conversation about the tarot itself. Now, nevertheless, when it comes to me getting that card of the Four of Cups, right, and thinking about it and how it applied to me at that moment, the general sort of traits that have to do with the Four of Cups are dissatisfaction, withdrawal, indifference, and the key word, the buzzword we're working with here, boredom. So, in me at that moment, recognizing that I was dissatisfied and I was bored, I was going ahead and just not really all too productive at that moment. And as I was just going ahead and not being all too productive, I came across some quotes by a particular figure who I definitely click with, I definitely, you could say, resonate with, or whatever terminology or phrase you find appropriate. And that figure being John Cage, who I went ahead and talked about previously in regards to some manners of their own personal philosophy, back when speaking about the topic of silence, solitude, and stillness, which that's another subject, can be in the description for you to go back and listen to. But nevertheless, John Cage, in essence, is a guy who was a Zen Buddhist, but also a musician and a musical theorist in a very avant-garde or outsider or just non-contemporary sort of way. And by contemporary, I mean more so like mainstream as opposed to like contemporaries who are in a shared time period. But he had a particular quote on boredom that went ahead and kind of like linked it, kind of like a light bulb went in my head, and you know, the train was rolling in that sort of sense. So, in this regard, it was him stating, if something is boring after 2 minutes, try it for 4. If still boring, then 8, then 16, then 32. Eventually one discovers that it's not boring at all. So, and of course, as the quote is stating, if you are trying something out that may not initially be your flavor, then go ahead and stick with it. Go ahead and try doing something for a longer period of time, and at some point you may get it. It may click for you. You may go ahead and get that sort of drive, that sort of initiative to go ahead and do, like, you know, actually want to pursue it more so, or you'll actually make progress in it. So either, you know, actual, like, you know, development, or just the inspiration to develop coming from that. Now, in relation to this sort of thing, right? I mentioned rest, right? So we're talking about boredom and how boredom can serve as a pathway to not being bored with something and going ahead and finding that inspiration, that innovation within it. Now, boredom, a lot of times when people are bored, what do they tend to do? They tend to go ahead and look to sleep or to rest. And that can be, you know, rest of like just sitting down on the couch, sitting in their chair, taking a walk at the park if that seems resting and relaxing, or, you know, sitting in the park, or whatever the case may be. But a lot of times it could be napping or sleeping to get a sort of reset. And John Cage has another sort of quote about sleep itself. So this one just seemed to tie in, and I wanted to go ahead and share that. Sleep's what we need. It produces an emptiness in us into which sooner or later energies flow. Now, in this sort of sense, of course it spoke to me and how boredom and rest are honestly the same thing, really, if you go ahead and think about it. That boredom is just something that has more so of a negative stigma and is just like you can't find anything that's particularly inspiring or interesting, whereas rest is just not necessarily doing anything that is, productive, or you can say producing anything, or, going ahead and exerting yourself, in a normal or too much of a manner. Overexertion being a potential thing. Overexhaustion being a potential thing that one can do. But, obviously on the other end of the spectrum here, rest and relaxation can be helpful. So, in regards to spectrums, I wanted to go ahead and speak about how, there's this one end of the spectrum. You could say boredom and rest. And then the other one being inspiration and productivity, just to use those terms of phrase, for lack of any other ones coming to my head at the moment. So, in regards to that, I think of the Hermetic principles that exist. For those not familiar with Hermeticism, the philosophy of it has existed for quite some time. In other talks and such, it has been brought up here and there. But when it comes to one of the 7 Hermetic principles that are discussed within a book called Kabbalion, written by 3 anonymous authors, or allegedly 3 tongue-tied anonymous authors, but there are 7 Hermetic sort of principles that exist. And in this, one of them happens to be the Hermetic principle of polarities, which in summary is all about how 2 things in their nature or their base essence are the same, yet they can differ in degree. Not necessarily they are the same exact thing in their core, but they have different expressions of themselves in, the different sides of the polarities. So in that sort of sense, you can say hot and cold, for an example. Or, in this case, boredom and rest, and innovation, inspiration, and productivity. Now, they don't exist as an absolute, but they are more so on a continuum, which allows for variety, change, and transformation. So, regarding that, think of, within your head, your imagination, your mind's eye, of a visual of a pendulum swinging back and forth from side to side. And one side provides momentum to swing all the way over to the other one. And then vice versa, and it's a continual dance going from side to side and all of that sort of thing. And this is them having pretty much a symbiotic feedback loop. And when I think of the term symbiotic or symbiosis, or things working in harmony together in a manner of sustaining life, when you break down the etymology of that word, it makes sense of what I just stated in regard to it. But nevertheless, I think of how we human beings exist with plants, flowers, trees, and other greenery, and that we go ahead and exhale carbon dioxide, which they need for food and fuel, to then convert into oxygen. And that is what they go ahead and actually exert themselves, and they put out, and they make it to where it is breathable for not only humans, but other animals and creatures as well. And we go ahead and we take in that oxygen, and we inhale it, we put it into our being, and then we put out carbon dioxide from the excess and the changes, the transformations that happen within our lungs and such. And thus, that is a continual feedback loop, that symbiotic feedback loop that goes on, that is beneficial for both parties, and one happens to be positive for one, and one happens to be negative for the other. So let's just think of that visual. Or another visual can be, if you're, say someone's in the hospital, and you're looking at someone getting their heart, their heart monitored, and all of that, and you see on the chart that it goes up and down based on the heartbeats and all of that sort of thing, the compressions of the heart. Now, in order for someone to actually truly live, they have to go ahead and have that up and down sequence, that grip and release sequence for their heart and such. And that is pretty much how the the principle of polarities works, to use those sort of visuals and examples, that you go ahead and, in order for one thing to exist, the other has to go ahead and be experienced as well. Push and pull. And I can keep listing examples, but I'm sure by this point you get what I'm saying. You're picking up what I'm putting down. And pretty much, when you go ahead and you think of that imagery, and you think of how it relates to boredom and rest becoming productivity, innovation, inspiration, creativity, and all these sorts of things, right? You can go ahead and see that sometimes we're just in need of a reset from being overwhelmed, overexhausted. Like maybe doing something monotonous for a while. You can go ahead and, or you can say something started off where you were inspired, but then became monotonous and became droll. It became boring over time. And then you need to allow yourself to be bored, to be in that rest period. And you can say that's kind of like, the low period, but then you're going to boom back up to a higher period and such, because that's just generally how things work based on the principle of polarities. And whether you allow yourself to more so easily go with that flow, or you're a bit resistant to it, then of course, that is up to you and your own experience and or development and progression of things. But nevertheless, honestly, I can go ahead and beat this dead horse and go ahead and keep expounding upon it, but I think I've pretty much gotten to the point. So, once again, just to wrap it all up and come full circle and all that sort of thing, boredom and rest are portals to inspiration and innovation, and also productivity as well, in the actual action of things being accomplished, or actions, plural, of things being accomplished. So, that having been said, this has been Twisted with Open Sorcery, and stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.